Thanks for joining me, Bastich B, for Import City, a look at the world of 80s and 90s Japanese gaming. In particular, we're going to check out Japan exclusive games and English fan translations, and show some really fun stuff that require no Japanese to enjoy. If you like the Famicom, Super Famicom, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn and PSX, then this may be for you. So now let's check out today's two games. The console of focus today will be the Super Famicom. We'll be looking at two Japan exclusive games, namely Super Back to the Future 2 and The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes. And in the pop culture segment, we'll take a brief look at manga and how it relates to retro Japanese gaming. Super Back to the Future 2 was released by Toshiba EMI exclusively in Japan in 1993. It is based on the characters from the Back to the Future movie series, or more accurately, Back to the Future 2.
Nobody calls me,
which came out in 1989. There have been a lot of games based on this franchise, and honestly, most of them just don't work at all.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Huh?
Everything from the Commodore 64 version, NES, and Mega Drive. It's been a real slap in the face to the hardcore movie fans. Super Back to the Future 2 though softens the blow slightly. It's not the greatest game ever made, but it is fun, and it's a kind of strange Japanese take on the movie.
Get the hell out of my car, old man!
The game is a fast-paced, side-scrolling action platform game, very reminiscent of Sonic the Hedgehog in terms of gameplay. You play Marty from the movie as you attempt to fix all the screw-ups in the timeline that were set in motion in the movie. You got levels that take place in 2015, alternate 1985, and 1955. Marty is decked out with a hoverboard from 2015, and you have to make your way through the levels, taking out bad guys, avoiding threats and collecting gold coins, and fighting massive bosses at the end of the levels. Just like Sonic, you can speed up and hit certain ramps and skip massive parts of the level as long as you know where you're gonna land to avoid death. Coins are collected and you can use them in vending machines to buy more lives or power-ups. The graphics are really nice and colorful and move at a pretty good pace. They chose to make all the characters in the super deformed Japanese style, which is a bit of an odd choice, but definitely makes it the most unique take on the movie in terms of style. The music has the Back to the Future theme by Alan Silverstreet blaring all the way through, and even though it's repeated a lot, it's hard not to like it. As to the reason why this game never got an English release, I can only guess two possibilities. Number one, the graphic style is very Japanese, and in the mid-90s, Western audiences hadn't embraced the Japanese anime or manga style as much as they have now, and I feel people would have been like,
yeah, what are you, deaf and stupid? I said no!
But more than likely it was the fact that it was released in 1993, with a potential English version slated for a 1994 release. That would be about 3 to 4 years after the movie was originally released, and I feel they thought nobody would really care anymore, which was obviously not true. Anyway, it's a fun game and a real curiosity if you're a hardcore Back to the Future fan. As far as the original import Japanese version is concerned, it's completely playable in Japanese, as the gameplay is very simplistic and requires absolutely no explanation, and as long as you've seen the movie, the cutscenes will make total sense, even though there are some major liberties being taken with certain story elements. There is also an English fan translation which I captured this footage from, which is quite excellent, and playable through any Super NES emulator, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. If you're a big fan of the movie, then this is definitely something you're gonna want to check out. Now let's switch things up and take a look at the Japanese manga scene. Manga, if you're not aware, is the word used to describe Japanese comics. This industry is absolutely huge in its native country. For example, in 1996, the weekly edition of Shonen Jump sold around 6 million copies, which is more than all the comics sold in the US in that same year. They are sold everywhere and not relegated to kids or teens as Western comics are, but are more diverse in subjects and account for roughly 35% of all books and magazines sold in Japan. Manga, as it's known today, was born from the works of Osamu Tezuka in the late 1940s. He himself was inspired by Disney and American comics and mashed that with his own Japanese stylings, which lends itself to something resembling a novel or movie more than a traditional Western comic book. Some of his creations, Metropolis and Astro Boy, went on to be huge, which eventually led to anime versions and finally video games by the time the 80s and 90s rolled around. Manga has inspired and become games, and games have inspired and become manga. It's all a circle now with the progression of media and how people choose to absorb it. The 80s saw the manga to game scene flourish in Japan with the launch of the Famicom, with titles such as Akira and Golgo 13 finding themselves in game form. Many more followed, with the likes of Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball being the most popular outside of Japan. Unfortunately for Western audiences, most of these games never saw the light of day in their countries due to the complicated storylines, unfamiliar characters and art styles clashing with Western stylings, and therefore were never officially translated or converted. Thankfully, with the rise of fan translation and manga in general being accepted in the West, hundreds of games from the 80s and 90s are now able to be played by English speakers and enjoyed for what they are, and I hope in this series to highlight as many as I can. And now let's go on over to today's second game. The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes was released in 1995 exclusively to Japan, and it was based loosely on the 1993 comic series, The Lethal Foes of Spider-Man. The reason I'm showcasing this game, as with Super Back to the Future 2, is that they are both major Western properties that had exclusive games. Is Spider-Man a fantastic game? Not really. It's like the previous one, it's good, but it's more of an interesting curiosity to hardcore fans of the character. Is it better than some of the Super Nintendo Spider-Man games? Definitely. I think it falls somewhere in the middle in my opinion of those. The game features a rogues gallery of Spider-Man foes to take down, with Venom, the Beetle, Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and more all coming over for a major smackdown. The gameplay boils down to making it through time stages as quickly as possible, taking out robots and henchmen before facing off against one of the many bosses. After you get to grips with the controls, which feel a little bit odd, you'll find the game pretty easy, and it's definitely made for beginner gamers. So if you like a challenge, it's definitely not here, although the cheap bosses are quite a pain to defeat. The story plays out in cutscenes in between the levels, just like a comic book. Spidey has a range of moves like shooting webs, brawling, climbing up walls, and swinging about, which all can be used at any time. The levels are generally pretty small and there's not much variety in the enemies, but I still found myself playing it regardless. The graphics are generally good, with just the lack of enemy variety being disappointing. Music is decent and it plays okay after a bit of practice. So is it worth importing? Well, that just really depends on how much of a Spidey fan you are. The Japanese version, like Super Back to the Future 2, is easily playable. The story is almost irrelevant, so there's no real language barrier. I was playing the English fan translation here, and I'll leave a link for it in the description to check out. Overall, I think the reason it never got an English release is again the year, 1995. If it got translated, it might have come out at 96, and by that time the Super Nintendo's best years were behind it, coupled with the fact that the system itself had quite a few Spider-Man games out already, and maybe it was just seen as being too much. Anyway, summing it up, if you're a hardcore Spidey fan, then this is worth a look. And for everyone else, maybe give the fan translation a spin and see what a rare Spider-Man game looks like in action. Thanks for joining me, Bastich B, for Import City, a look at the world of 80s and 90s Japanese gaming. In particular, we're going to check out Japan exclusive games and English fan translations, and show some really fun stuff that require no Japanese to enjoy. If you like the Famicom, Super Famicom, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn and PSX, then this may be for you. So now let's check out today's two games. The console of focus today will be the Sega Mega Drive. We'll be taking a look at two Japan exclusive games, namely Gley Lancer and Battle Mania 2. And in the pop culture segment, we'll be taking a brief look at anime and how it relates to the retro gaming Japanese scene. Battle Mania Daigenjo is a scrolling shoot-'em-up released exclusively in Japan for the Sega Mega Drive by Vic Tokai in 1993. It's a sequel to the excellent original that went under the name Troubleshooter in the West. I'll put a link in the end credits for my review on that first game. I describe this game straight off the bat as fun. The tongue-in-cheek approach and the well-balanced difficulty makes you want to just keep playing this till the wee hours of the morning. The characters Maria and Mania are back, taking care of trouble and shooting the hell out of each problem thrown at them in the 9 levels of madness that this game throws at you. The graphics have had a major upgrade from the previous title and are extremely colorful and well animated, as is the backgrounds and the variety of the locations. You again get to select your weapon before each level, which affects the type of smart bomb you also receive, and some are way more useful in certain levels than others, so pick carefully. The bosses are way more elaborate this time and have a treasure feel to them, meaning just when you think you've killed it, it transforms again and starts attacking. It's awesome and totally keeps you on your toes to the bitter end. This game is a bit more challenging than the first one, as the pace is much faster and so are the amount of enemies that they throw at you. The stages also switch themselves up from horizontal to vertical every few levels to add that bit of variety, but just be aware, the vertical scrolling levels are much harder than the horizontal ones. The music is really good, really upbeat tunes, really catchy stuff, but the sound effects are a little bit mediocre, but not enough to take away from anything of the game. As a side note, just make sure you go into the options and set what control style suits you. It makes a big difference to the enjoyment of the game overall. This is an excellent hidden gem of a shoot 'em up from Vic Tokai, who seem to have made a full career out of hidden gems. Whether you hunt down this game on the original Mega Drive version or play it through emulation, you're in for a damn good time. So this game did get a release outside of Japan, namely Korea, very limited, so most people still wouldn't have played it. And if you're thinking of importing the game, it's completely playable in English, it's very simplistic gameplay. There is also an English fan translation if you're interested. Now let's switch things up and take a look at the Japanese anime scene. Anime, if you're not familiar with the term, is the Japanese description for cartoons. It's a variation on the English word animation. As we saw in the first episode of the series, manga or Japanese comics have gone hand in hand with anime to produce one of the most unique and distinctive styles of visual entertainment, not only for kids, but adults as well. Japan's first animated feature was a black and white World War II propaganda film called Momotaro's Sea Eagles, released in 1943. But it wasn't really until 1963's Tezuka Osamu's Astro Boy TV series that the genre really came into its own. Episode 1 has the origins of Tezuka and his manga roots for anyone interested in his beginnings. Anime went from strength to strength in its native country, producing countless classics like adaptations of Heidi or Lupin III, both taking inspiration from European stylings, which is a common thread in a lot of anime. Western audiences slowly got adaptations of some of Japan's best in TV form. The first anime I ever watched was a TV series called Battle of the Planets, or better known in Japan as Gatchaman. It was amazing to see these complicated narrators, ongoing storyline, and real consequences for actions. It was unlike any other cartoons I had ever seen, and this continued on into the 80s with iconic adaptations of Super Dimension Fortress Macross, or Robotech as Western audiences know it as, which was one of my personal favorite TV series. 1988's Akira was a landmark for the anime movie industry, not only in Japan but also in the West, heralding a massive influx of dubbed and subtitled VHS releases to flood the Western markets in the early 90s. I can't even count how many bootleg VHS subtitled anime series I used to have. Everything from the complete record of Lotus War series to 3x3 Hours and Bubblegum Crisis. It truly was a golden period for the art form. Anime video game adaptations really kicked off in the 80s, just like the manga adaptations, with hundreds of titles being left in Japan and never converted to English. Many of these anime series already had Western dubbed TV roots, but were still passed over for the video game releases. Whether they felt the translations weren't worth it or the audiences were just a little bit too small to justify the cost of converting them, the end result was a lot of missed anime games for popular series such as Robotech, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, and so many more. Today's two games may not have anime roots per se, but the animation style is obviously present in full force, and hopefully through ongoing episodes of the series we can explore some of these excellent anime-based games as well. And now let's jump back to today's second game. Gley Lancer, or also known as Advanced Buster Hawk Gley Lancer, was released in 1992 on the Sega Mega Drive and published by Messiah. It was a physical-only release in Japan and Korea. The game was a horizontal scrolling shoot-'em-up developed by NCS, or Nippon Computer Systems, who were a Japanese game developer formed in 1980 and were defunct by the year 2000. The game was released through their distribution division called Messiah, and if you're an avid Japanese import gamer, you probably already recognize them for their heaps of excellent Japan exclusives, such as Cho Anarchy, Star Cruiser, Vixen 357, and many unconverted installments of the Lancer strategy series. And back to Gley Lancer, which delivers 11 levels of excellent shoot-'em-up action. At the beginning you get to choose your weapon style and the way it behaves and helps you. For example, choosing reverse means extra guns will concentrate on foes attacking you from behind, or follow will target anything and track it until it dies. There's a whole bunch, and I'd suggest trying them all to see what suits you. The weapons are pretty varied, from powerful lasers to twin shots, the short range but brutal lightsabers, bouncing shots, etc, etc. It's a nice mix and they all have their uses in certain levels. Another gameplay aspect that I like is the speed option, where at any time you can change the speed of your ship to escape or dodge fast, intense bullet situations. Unlike most shooters, this actually has a pretty cool story as well, all played out in anime style cutscenes, and continues between the levels for the whole game. The story involves a girl named Lucia who steals a prototype combat ship, the Gley Lancer, in an attempt to rescue her father who got abducted by an alien race. So it's basically Iron Eagle in space. There's a lot of things to like here, from the impressive graphics and enemy variety, short but intense levels that don't overstay their welcome, and a really cool story which is not common for this genre of game. The music, though, admittedly is just average and totally forgettable, but at least it isn't annoying in any sort of way. If you plan on getting a physical copy to play, the game is completely playable in its Japanese form. Even the menus are already in English. The story obviously will be completely lost in translation though, so you have to decide how important that is to you. A Japanese physical re-release was issued a couple years ago, but good luck on finding that. It was extremely limited. An English fan translation though is available, so playing it through emulation will give English speakers at least the full game experience. This game also in 2008 did see the light of day in the West in the form of a digital version on the Wii Virtual Console, although the story was still in Japanese. But as with all digital media, it's here one day and gone tomorrow, so if you never got it then you're out of luck. Overall, it's a pretty good game for fans of the genre to sink your teeth into. It's not the greatest shooter ever made by any means, but the combination of many little features make it well worth experiencing. Thanks for joining me, Bastich B, for Import City, a look at the world of 80s and 90s Japanese gaming. In particular, we're going to check out Japan exclusive games and English fan translations, and show some really fun stuff that require no Japanese to enjoy. If you like the Famicom, Super Famicom, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn and PSX, then this may be for you. So now let's check out today's two games. Today we'll be having a look at Gamera 2000 on the Japanese PSX, as well as Godzilla Generations Maximum Impact on the Sega Dreamcast. And in the pop culture segment we'll be having a look at a brief history of Kaiju movies and how they relate to today's games. Gamera 2000 was released in 1997 by Dai Digital Entertainment on the Japanese PSX exclusively. The game features Gamera, a sometimes bad guy, sometimes good guy kaiju monster. This game, however, is loosely based on the Gamera movie series from about the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, and features him as a hero helping to defend Earth against a full-scale alien invasion. As you can probably see, this game is a combination of two of my favorite games from the 90s, that being Panzer Dragoon and Wing Commander 3. And if you think that unholy union sounds like fun, then you are 100% correct.
Yes, sir.
As it manages to take the best of both games for an excellent on-rail shoot-'em-up / FMV action adventure. The game's story is fleshed out through some of the best ham-fisted FMV this side of Surgical Strike.
Is that what we call Gamera?
That's right.
Which not only tells a story, but lets you investigate scenes and trigger events and conversations. The production values on these scenes are really quite good, and everything is in English, from the dialogue to the menus, making it a perfect import-friendly game. The acting is insanely bad, with ridiculous dialogue and stilted deliveries, and by God, do I love it all.
The level of
magnetism is getting unusually high.
I make no qualms about FMV games. Check out my Sega CD Top 10 FMV list for more awesomeness. And on the other side of the game is a brilliant ripoff of Sega's magnificent Panzer Dragoon. And damn do they do a good job here. You get to ride in a spaceship for air missions and a hoverbike for ground attacks. You got your regular fire plus a lock-on Panzer multi-shot, which is actually Gamera firing his laser blast as he flies next to you as a sort of wingman. The game takes you all over the world with its 8 stages, mixing it up between air assaults, giant impressive boss battles, fast-paced hoverbike sequences, and brilliantly cheesy FMV cutscenes.
Lisa, I want you to ride the bike.
I can handle it. Trust me.
All in a neat little package. The graphics are extremely impressive with great looking 3D animation and stages that move at a really fast pace. There's some really good music tracks as well supplied by Zuntata, Taito's in-house soundtrack team, who always deliver the goods music-wise. The FMV sequences give a nice break from the action, with choices you make affecting the type of ending you get as well. The PSX doesn't really have any type of this game in this style, especially this bizarre combination. And like I said earlier, this game is 100% import friendly, with dialogue and menus all in English, although you will still need a Japanese PSX to play it. This game was going to be released through THQ in the West, but plans fell through for that, which makes it one of the best hidden gem PSX shoot 'em ups you're gonna find. Now let's switch things up with a brief history of Japanese kaiju movies. Kaiju is a genre of Japanese films dating back to 1954 with the first ever movie of the genre, Godzilla. Kaiju roughly means strange beast, and these movies usually comprise of giant monsters rampaging through major Japanese cities, destroying everything and battling other rival kaiju. 1933's King Kong by RKO Pictures is cited as the inspiration for this entire genre, even leading to the eventual co-production of King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962. The monsters of these movies are usually victims of the humans' disregard for the environment or the results of military experiments gone awry. The human characters in these movies keep the message going as the kaiju add the spectacle. It's a formula that's been going on for decades and is still ongoing today, even though they have unfortunately traded in the tactile man-in-suit miniature approach for soulless CGI effects, which really deflate the fun of these movies, at least for me anyway. A rival Japanese film company, Kadokawa, came up with its own character in the 1960s named Gamera as a rival to Toho's Godzilla. Both have massive libraries of movies and literature to go along with, including today's 2 games. The kaiju style of movie making is also considered a subgenre of the Japanese tokuhatsu style. Tokuhatsu means special effects, so any movie or TV show that uses a lot of them is considered tokuhatsu. The 1960s and 70s were flooded with these types of movies and TV shows in Japan, with programs like Kamen Rider, Ultraman, and Super Sentai, later brought to the West in the form of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. These shows were all variations on the kaiju cinema, with human heroes usually able to grow to gigantic size and fight kaiju or pilot giant mechs to fight humongous alien invaders. The first Godzilla video game ever released was on the Commodore 64, simply titled Godzilla, and was a strategy game where you had to stop the big green beast from reaching Tokyo by any military means necessary before he obliterates the city. Many more followed, including games on the Japanese MSX computer, the NES, and even 80s software house Epix licensing Godzilla for the inclusion in the C64's The Movie Monster game. These games all vary drastically in quality, but even so, playing them still usually brings a smile to my face even at the worst of times, which takes us to today's second game. Godzilla Generations Maximum Impact was released on the Dreamcast in 1999 and published by Sega, and is the sequel to Godzilla Generations, which came out a year earlier. Just like our previous game, this is not only an on-rail shooter, but also based loosely on the Godzilla movies of the past few decades, pre-2000s, and features Godzilla as your main character as he shuffles his way through levels, destroying everything and taking out the who's who of the Toho bad guy universe. I'm not gonna lie, this game is average coverage at best and is no hidden gem. There was a reason it stayed a Japan-only exclusive after all. Having said that, if you're a huge Kaiju fan and just love absolutely mindless gameplay, then this is going to be right up your alley. The game claims to have a story mode, but it's almost non-existent and boils down to one gameplay style with two variations. The walking simulator stages takes Godzilla to his locations, and in these you rumble your way through various Japanese cities like Tokyo, Osaka, Okinawa, etc., and obliterate anything in your path, from tanks, planes, buildings, and famous landmarks. As you head to the local boss battle, you got a Panzer lock-on move which destroys multiple targets all at once, and a massive charge-up shot for mass destruction. Boss battles then pit you against a multitude of regular Kaiju beasties from Biollante to King Ghidorah and Mothra, etc., etc. These are kind of one-on-one arena smackdowns. The same gameplay is essentially in effect, just that you have full control now over Godzilla, including a dodge move that you'll definitely have to apply during the later boss battles to survive. The game is basically a rinse-repeat of this formula with more cities and bosses to destroy, and is generally pretty easy game to get through. The graphics are okay, they are very dark and muted and definitely doesn't show anything the Dreamcast was capable of. Music is pretty cool though, with Godzilla theme tunes and sound effects blasting all over the place, which is great for true fans of the series. Gameplay is generally quite clunky, with a dodge move that needs like 10 minutes pre-hit time to activate for it to work, and everything else is just kinda sluggish. Having laid all that wonderful praise on this game, I still find it kinda fun in a very mindless way to slap this in and destroy a whole bunch of stuff. If you're in the mood for it and are a massive Kaiju fan, it's worth a look, obviously for cheap, and is another Western friendly import game, as all the menus are in English and the story is pretty much non-existent. So give the old Dreamcast a spin and go blast a Kaiju in the face. Thanks for joining me, Bastich B, for Import City, a look at the world of 80s and 90s Japanese gaming. In particular, we're going to check out Japan exclusive games and English fan translations, and show some really fun stuff that require no Japanese to enjoy. If you like the Famicom, Super Famicom, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn and PSX, then this may be for you. So now let's check out today's two games. And on today's episode, we're going to have a look at two exclusive Japanese Sega Saturn games, namely Groove on Fight and Astra Superstars. And in the pop culture segment, we'll be having a look at Japan and all its various forms of martial arts. And in today's episode, I'll be joined by import gaming aficionado Retro Drew, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Bastich. And if any of you are unfamiliar with my channel, Retro Drew, well, it's all about covering obscure import games that not a lot of people have talked about. And on top of that, I do video game pickups episodes, as well as video game themed episodes where I just talk about various gaming topics. So if any of that sounds right up your alley, be sure to check out my channel.
And now let's jump over to our first game. Groove on Fight was released in 1997 on the Sega Saturn and arcade exclusively in Japan by Atlus. From a Western perspective, it seemed like Atlus didn't support the Saturn in any way, but in Japan they were a top developer, with multiple games in the Shin Megami Tensei RPG series and the brilliant Japan exclusive Princess Crown also being released. This was just another game that never got an international debut. Groove was the fourth game in the Power Instinct series of fighting games, which saw at least the first game released in English on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, but was quickly forgotten in the 90s glut of fighters. Groove on Fight takes the basic element of those games and dials it up into a tag team based versus fighting mold that keeps all the same wackiness of the game world intact, although the players are almost all new characters. The arcade featured 11 characters to choose from, with the Saturn version dialing it up to 14, which is a significant amount. I describe this game as a cross between Capcom's Darkstalkers and the X-Men vs Street Fighter games. It has a crazy, unpredictable character roster and weird gothic steampunk style world with the play mechanics of the Capcom tag team games. Just like in those games, you pick two fighters and start. The second character can be tagged in at any time, giving a bit of strategy to balancing those health bars. Specials are also present and are pretty easy to pull off, so you don't have to have a phone book like Mortal Kombat strategy guide sitting next to you to pull off a simple move. And if you have a Saturn multi-tap, 4 people can play at once, each taking a character in a tag team versus match, which is pretty damn impressive. The game also has a story mode, but it's obviously in Japanese and it is lost on me. It doesn't hurt the game at all though, as the core mechanic is easy to understand and play, and the game is still import friendly with all the English menus. This game for me's charm comes in 3 pieces. Extremely fun and diverse characters make each one feel completely different and a joy to learn. Simple, easy to get to grips with gameplay, make it a fun party game. And last but definitely not least is their groovy soundtrack. I'm assuming that's where the name comes from. It's a clash of every music style in one game, and reminds me a lot of classic Sega style soundtracks from this period. The Saturn version also includes an arranged soundtrack as well, something quite common in Japanese releases. You'll also need a RAM card to play it. It boosts the animation in the game, much like the Capcom vs games did. My only real gripe at this game is the loading. There is a lot of it, so you better get used to seeing that screen. It does slow the pace down quite a bit, but not enough to ruin the whole experience. You just need to exercise a little bit of patience. Overall, a bit of a forgotten gem I feel. It's import friendly and will definitely be enjoyed by anyone who likes the tag team style versus games, or is looking for a fighting game that's just a little bit different. And in today's segment about Japan, we'll take a quick look at Japanese martial arts in all its styles. In Japan, these categories are divided into 3 main styles: striking, grappling, and weapons. Most of these styles are aimed at self-defense and try to minimize the risk of injury to your opponent. In the striking category, the 2 most popular are karate and taekwondo. Both those arts trace their origins to China and Korea, respectively. Japanese karate originated on the islands of Okinawa and is based on Chinese kenpo. Okinawa is an island off the coast of Japan, so these techniques were developed in isolation for many centuries before being introduced to the mainland and the world en masse, mainly after World War II due to the many Americans being stationed there during the war and learning and spreading its art. Grappling martial arts have 4 major styles: Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Sumo, and Aikido. Jiu-Jitsu originated and was developed by samurai to disarm opponents if you find yourself in a situation without a weapon. Judo is similar and is based on Jiu-Jitsu. This is where you use an opponent's strength against them to take them out, and gained international fame after being introduced in the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games. Aikido is a relatively modern art developed and honed between the 1930s and 60s, and is used to neutralize a situation before it begins. And the final grappling art is Sumo, which started more than 2,000 years ago, but has become one of Japan's most popular sports. It employs many old religious traditions based on Shinto, with its combination of strength and balance being the art. Finally, in the weapon style, we have Kendo and Kyodo. Kendo, which means way of the sword, is the art of training with wooden sword and dates back to the samurai training days. Kyodo, which is known as the way of the bow, is the spiritual art of archery. Both these arts in Japan share long traditions of competition in various forms that has become more and more popular over the years. The goal overall though in all Japanese style arts is to gain self-improvement, self-esteem, and personal growth, and in a sense is a form of meditation and balance in life. Today's games feature many forms of these arts, but don't stick to any one style. But in future episodes we can elaborate on some of these styles more when dealing with games that stick to one particular art. And now on to our second review.
Released by Sunsoft in 1996 on Sega's black box of shmups and fighters, we have Astra Superstars, which is more than just your ordinary fighter. As a whole, it's a wacky, well-paced romp that can be enjoyed by just about anyone. But let's break things down a bit further. By just eyeing the footage, I'm sure you can see that Astra Superstars ventures outside the normalcy of the genre, as every battle is basically airborne. This lends itself to some unprecedented features like being able to dodge under attacks or setting yourself up to do some devastating damage from below. And while these dogfights are a touch floaty, I can assure you that the controls and overall feel are tighter than they look. The playfield isn't the only unique mechanic, as Astra Superstars doesn't rely on the established Street Fighter control style, but instead can best be described as a mashup between Smash Bros. And Street Fighter, as your face buttons all do different attacks, 2 of which are your specials, and after performing a Street Fighter button combo, one can unleash a super as well. Personally, I adore this mixing of the playstyles, as it caters towards a simple pick-up and play feel that just about anyone can easily adapt to after 1 or 2 rounds, but it does go a bit deeper for those who want some extra depth in their fighting systems. For example, the game has a reversal system as well as a guard break. But most interestingly is the game will grade you based on how well you fight. So if a round times out, just because you have more health doesn't guarantee you the victory. You better hope you've outmatched your opponent's technical prowess. Graphically, the game isn't going to knock you off your feet, as I think just about every Capcom fighter of the time blows this one out of the water. But I won't deny that this game succeeds at its own style. The over-the-top moves carried out by each character all have a unique and colorful flair to them, as do the characters themselves. I mean, where else are you gonna fight an anime girl sporting her best Santa cosplay who's not afraid to give you a taste of Santa's sack? Or how about the anime embodiment of Cupid, who can smack you around with her wings that she can grow at will? And you've gotta love little details like pummeling your opponent so hard that they turn into a pinball and ricochet around the screen, or that a handful of the songs that score these fights have vocals. The backdrops to each fight are also quite serviceable, with their striking colors and neat touches throughout. I mean, just about every stage pops thanks to the pre-rendered backgrounds. Also, you gotta love Teskun's stage, which is just a mishmash of random textures on what is presumably a skyline. As I stated at the top of this review, Astra Superstars delivers on a unique, yet familiar take on the fighting game genre that has definitely stood the test of time. So next time you're in need of a fresh fighter, why not give Astra Superstars a shot? And of course, before I wrap this up, I'd like to give Bastich a huge thank you for having me on the show, and if you like this review, feel free to check out my channel as there are plenty more like it.
God, your son, Ichi. Thanks for joining me, Bastich B, for Import City, a look at the world of 80s and 90s Japanese gaming. In particular, we're going to check out Japan exclusive games and English fan translations, and show some really fun stuff that require no Japanese to enjoy. If you like the Famicom, Super Famicom, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn and PSX, then this may be for you. So now let's check out today's two games. So on today's episode, I'm going to look at two Sega Saturn shoot-em-ups. Both these Saturn versions were never released outside of Japan, and they are Twinkle Star Sprites and Kingdom Grand Prix. But now let's flip on over to our first game. Twinkle Star Sprites was released originally in the arcades by ADK in 1996 and debuted on Neo Geo's MVS system. The Sega Saturn version came out 1 year later in 1997. At first glance it looks like a generic shooter, but look a little closer and most people might even think it's a puzzle game. Well, it's definitely different and unique, and Twinkle is a strange hybrid of cute-em-up and strategy and intense two-player versus tropes. Just like classic puzzle games like Puyo Puyo or Puzzle Fighter, it's about creating combos and throwing those onto the second player or computer screen. You first get to choose your character made out of 14 wacky individuals, then it's off to the first level. The screen is split in two like a puzzle game, but instead of matching blocks, you're blasting stuff in classic shooter style, with either regular fire or an R-type style charge shot. Taking out rows of enemies triggers combos and sends more enemies to your opponent's screen, and vice versa. It's like an old school game of tug of war, with you both blasting for survival until one person eventually gets overwhelmed. A host of combos and status changing effects are also present, like blasting the blue orbs, for example, sends the action into fever status, which essentially doubles the amount of enemies killed being thrown back at your opponent. The level ends if your opponent gets obliterated or you lose all your hearts. There is so much to like here, but overall the originality is its best feature. The Saturn version is also a fantastic port of the arcade original, enhancing it in so many ways. The wonderful new anime-styled intro sequence and awesome second disc, which is loaded with artwork and making of material, is such a blast to go through. The graphics take the best of a Konami Parodius game and run with it. The music is infectious and cheery, and even if you're the grumpiest of grumps, I'm sure your feet will be tapping in no time. The gameplay is fantastic fun, with each level being short and sweet before blasting you off to the next stage. This Saturn version is still my favorite, although there's there's also a cool Dreamcast one, but that is only available in Japan. This game did eventually get an English release on PC and various consoles in digital form only in the late 2010s. All of them, however, are only ports of the standard arcade version without any extras. If you enjoy collecting imports though and are looking for something unique that even in Japanese that will require zero knowledge of to play, then look no further than Twinkle Star Sprites. Kingdom Grand Prix was originally released in the arcades in 1994 by Raising, a company whose shoot-'em-up pedigree is in the highest regard, with gems such as Battle Garega and 1944 The Loop Master in their wheelhouse. And if you're unaware, this game is part of a trilogy and is the second part of the Maiho Daisuke-sen games, which also includes Saucer Striker and Daimahu, which was covered in episode number 5 of my Shoot-'em-up Decade series if you want to learn more about it. Like Twinkle Star, this game is very unique for the genre and also received a wonderful Japan exclusive version for the Sega Saturn. What's weird about this one is that it quite successfully, once you get to grips with the concept that is, combines a shoot 'em up and racing game into a single style. And I don't mean a simple racer with some blasting action, but a full bullet hell styled affair while racing and taking out your opponents on top of everything else. It's a bizarre combination that works quite well once your brain gets the gist of it. The plot has every racer in his or her own strange vehicles competing from across the kingdom for the Grand Prix title, with war obliterated in this world. This is the peasant's favorite yearly pastime to watch. The Saturn version, unlike the arcade one, has two different versions on it. The arcade style where racing and shooting are the gameplay, and the Saturn mode where you can disregard the race altogether and treat the game simply as a bullet hell affair. So basically whatever works for you, which is a cool addition. In the arcade mode you got regular shots and a charge shot, which is basically a turbo boost to help you catch up or dodge things quicker. You can also see where you are on the left hand side of the screen with your map, and you also get a nifty selection of screen destroying bombs as per usual, and their effect depend on which of the 8 characters you picked from. It's fast and frantic and quite different from the glut of shmups that were out during this period. I also love the fact that after each race you get to pick your next level, kinda like Outrun, making one playthrough not enough to see all its 12 levels in total. The graphics are just an excellent example of multi-scrolling sprite work. The soundtrack by Hitoshi Sakimoto, who also did Radiant Silvergun's cool score, and gameplay is unique and challenging in the best possible ways. This is another one that's import friendly 100% with zero knowledge of Japanese needed to enjoy, and when setting it into arcade mode it even flips the screen to the side so you can orientate your monitor for that authentic arcade accurate aspect ratio. So check it out, it's a great shot of a developer trying something different and ultimately succeeding.